Hey, well, it's Huck, and I'm going to apologize right off the start here. I hate to make videos when I'm, wearing the oxygen, and frankly, there have been quite a few days this last week where, I probably could have done this video without wearing it. But I'm up really late tonight. In fact, it's not even nighttime. It's going on 5 a.m. And been having a little difficulty sleeping the last few nights. The reason that I'm wearing the oxygen tonight is because, it is late, and I have been up, most of the day and night. But I couldn't sleep, and I got in the mood to share with you. One of the things that has kept old Huck going here, throughout this pandemic. Like all of you, I'm sure I've been doing things as safely as I can. Given my condition, it's an absolute necessity, I'm sure. But I have not taken any real unnecessary risks, and it is a hardship, as I'm sure it's been a hardship for everyone through all of this. I have stayed at home and kept from being around others, as much as I possibly can. And so, it does get a little boring, and it has been a boon for those people who want to invest their time in some sort of homebound, hobby of sorts. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about what I've kind of been doing in my, leisure time, if you will. And that is, I've kind of gotten back into the interest in, vinyl records, LPs. Now, before I go on, let me just explain that, first of all, I don't have a lot of money. I exist largely because I've been getting a lot of help along with, what income I do get. And so I'm not able to go, full bore into like collecting a big album collection that is actually quite a popular pastime, as I understand right now. And unfortunately, it also means it's driving the prices up of a lot of the albums that I would like to, eventually possess. But that's beside the point. The point is that over the past year or so, I have been looking around. I have a list of albums that I would like to replace that I once owned, or in some cases albums that I didn't even know about, back then, or I have come to appreciate more now. At any rate, it's a long list, and I'm never going to get anywhere close to, fulfilling even a fraction of it. But I look for great deals and bargains, and particularly I have highlighted certain albums that that I would dearly like to own again. And when I say own again, it's because I was fortunate at a time in my life when I was in my late 20s or so, or mid 20s. I got hired. I think it was 1977. So I would have been about 20 years old, 21 years old. I got hired at Lordstown. And Lordstown at that time was just changing over from making the Chevrolet Monza to the Cavalier. And I worked there a total of about 11 years. I worked there until February of '88. And at that point I was trying to go to college. I'd been going a little bit part-time, and they were offering a buyout. Any employee who wanted to basically sell their job back to GM. And the reason was because at that time, the Lordstown plant was building two vehicles. They had a fabrication plant, which made the frames of the vehicles, and they were making the Cavalier, and they were making the Chevy van. So they had basically three buildings there. And in '77, when I got hired, I believe it was August of '77 that I got hired, they had hired about 1,500 people, all basically at the same time. And that was because they were adding a third shift. So basically the plant was going to run 24 hours round the clock from that point on. In the meantime, the Chevy van plant was working two shifts. When I took the buyout in '88, it was because they were going to eliminate the van plant. And they had, by that time, they had trimmed, the number of workers down on each shift to the point where even eliminating the two shifts on in the van plant, basically eliminating the plant altogether, was going to eliminate about 1,500 employees there. So at any rate, it was looking like they were going to end up coming for those people that had my seniority. And so the buyout made a lot of sense. It would give me enough money to continue my education and help pay for some of it, and pay off all of my debts at that time. But in the meantime, in that 12-year period of time, I had invested in a very nice, stereo system at the time. I mean, it wasn't spectacular. You can spend thousands of dollars on, and you can spend $4,000 just on speakers if you want to. I didn't go crazy, but I had a very nice receiver. I remember, in fact, all of my components to my stereo back then were made by a company called JVC out of Japan, and I had like a ridiculously good receiver. I think it was like 200 or 300 watts per channel. It was crazy. I never could turn it up over like 3 in the house. It had I had a very, a fairly decent turntable. I didn't buy a real expensive one, but I bought a decent JVC turntable, which, by the way, is the one piece of equipment that I still own and still use. And I think I had a cassette deck. Actually, over the years, I probably had 2 or 3 cassette decks. Still have one of them, not that one anymore. And I'm trying to think, I had some, I never invested, probably the kind of money that most audiophiles would in things like speakers and things, but mine were adequate, and I always looked at the specs and things, so I knew what what they needed to have. At any rate, all of that, of course, is long gone. I still have the turntable, however, and today, the last stereo system that I bought was basically a bookshelf system, which I still have, and it's, it's nothing like the kind of component systems that we used to have. But this is made by LG. I think I paid a little over $200 for it at Best Buy, if I'm not mistaken, when I purchased it, probably 10 or, I'm guessing about 10 or 12 years ago. And it works, fairly well. It allows you to plug in, at least one component to it. It has a stereo AM FM radio. It has actually it plays CDs and DVDs. Although it doesn't have a screen, you'd have to hook it up, to a monitor or a TV. I've never used it for that. I've used it to play DVDs. CDs. But at any rate, the system works pretty good. And so you can hook up a cassette deck to it, or you can hook up a turntable to it if you have a relatively inexpensive preamplifier, because it doesn't have a built-in preamp for that. And so I did. I bought one. I think it was like $20, and it actually produces pretty decent sound. Now, at my age, my hearing probably isn't as advanced and precise as it was when I was in my 20s. And that was always the reason, that most people who collected albums and listened to their music, on vinyl, would give for why they prefer their music, in records rather than in other forms. The truth is, there is a noticeable difference for most people. If you really want to hear specific parts of the music at certain volumes, whether it be those very high treble sounds, or clear and less muffled bass sounds, whether it's specific instruments. There are things that you can hear on a good vinyl record that simply are missing from listening to that same piece of music reproduced using an MP3 digital file, for instance, or even a CD, because those are compressed music files that, in order to create that file in that amount of space, they have to take out certain information, and in doing so, you're losing a little bit of the sound. That said, the average person driving in their car isn't going to notice any difference. And same thing is if you've got, dinner and conversation going on, and the music playing in the background, you're probably not going to notice the difference. Also, as you age, your hearing, as I said, certainly isn't as good as it was. I think, if I'm not mistaken, I read somewhere one time where your hearing peaks at like the age of 9, and it kind of goes downhill from then. I don't know for certain if that's true, but it with our luck, it probably is. Having said all of that, there is no question but that I can hear the difference. In some cases, a really noticeable difference of playing, any number of songs on the turntable, as opposed to hearing it, out of my computer, for instance, or from my smartphone. So, what I have been doing over the last, since this whole pandemic started, about a year ago, maybe a little less, is I have been looking to, add to my, relatively small collection of albums. Like I said, at one time, during that period when I had pretty good money to spend and I was young and foolish, I started building up a pretty decent collection of at least a lot of the things that I liked. I had at one time, I think, the entire collection of every album ever made by Cat Stevens. That included at least one or two imports, as I recall, because they weren't all real easy to find. I had, I think, every Beatles album released in the United States at the time, including one really, as it turned out, very rare one, which I guess had become ridiculously valuable later, but I have long since parted with it, unfortunately. I'll never get that. There was an album called Yesterday and Today that came out, and it had the band members were all dressed in white robes, and they were adorned with baby doll parts and raw meat. And I think particularly in the Bible Belt, there was a big stink about it, and so immediately, I think it was Capitol Records, recalled like 750,000 copies of this album. So only about, if I'm not mistaken, I think about 250,000 were distributed before the recall. And so out of that 250,000, most of those, by the way, going to, like radio stations and, to get airplay or whatever. But at any rate, I happened to get one of the originals. And like a lot of my other, albums, there was a period of time where probably about a year before I went on to disability, where I was becoming increasingly unable to work. And those of you that have been following, either of my two channels long enough probably recall some of the videos I made during that time. I literally was working less than half of my scheduled work days because I was getting so sick and I wasn't able to walk the distance from the parking garage downtown Youngstown to the building where I worked at this call center. And on the days that I could get to the call center, my condition was so bad that I couldn't get through the whole shift, talking on the phone because my voice wasn't able to, wasn't up to that demand. So I know probably the last, I want to say about 2 months, give or take, of that period of time, I was on an extended sick leave. It was just getting over the winter, and it was extremely cold and windy, and I just couldn't. I was coming down with pneumonia, over and over again. I was in and out of the hospital, and they were very, very good to me at work. They kept extending my sick leave until finally they had to medically discharge me. I've actually gotten several offers from them to come back and work, even during this pandemic. I was a good worker when I was there, but I say all that because there was a period of time there for close to a year, probably a little more than a year, where I had little to no income coming in. All of those months where I was barely able to work, or unable to work at all. And then once I was medically discharged, I was finally convinced by my doctor, to file for Social Security disability. This would have been about 5 years ago, I guess, almost exactly from now. And so at that point, I couldn't work at all if I wanted to, because if I had been able to work, first of all, I would have been denied my claim. Not that I mattered, clearly I was struggling to just survive. But I went a long period of time without really having any earned income. And what got me through that period, because I clearly had bills to pay, I'm still paying a mortgage, and I had, any number of other, utilities, food, everything. There was one person in particular and has been, one person in particular that really has been my, you know, my salvation for, has literally kept me in my house and kept me alive, and through that person's generosity and sending me financial assistance, you know, on a continual, regular basis, it has allowed me to get through not only that period, but has allowed me to survive ever since. And I've talked about that before. And in those days, when I had no other income whatsoever, I still had to supplement that to quite a degree. And so, you know, the album collection was a big one of the significant resources I used to supplement my income. I found out then, and this was, like I say, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that many of those albums, which, by the way, most of which were in like pristine condition, were worth, you know, anywhere from $20, $25, some almost double that. Problem was, you know, being able to have the patience to wait until somebody was willing to purchase one on eBay or whatever. But I had at that time, like I say, a number of, you know, it was kind of hit or miss. I had, I think, the complete Genesis collection up to through Abacab. I had, you know, a couple of this and a couple of that. Any of my favorites. I was particularly fond of certain, you know, artists and bands. People that collect albums, and I mean, I guess if I got a message to anybody that has an interest in this, this would be what I would advise you, at least for what it's worth. You know, there are all kinds of resources out there, and YouTube channels and otherwise, that are going to try to tell you, you know, that these are the most collectible albums, and these are the most valuable albums, that these are the albums you must hear before you die. These are the albums that you must have in any collection. And to which my feeling is that's all, you know, that's all bullshit. The albums that should be in your collection are the music that you like listening to, whatever that is. A lot of those lists, to me, and I've looked at them all, you know, on the one hand, I can see one purpose in them, and that is that, you know, most of us are somewhat sheltered. There's no way that we can be exposed to, you know, all of what's out there. So if this list inspires you to, you know, to listen to something you've not heard before, you know, there's a very good chance that something is going to stick, and you're going to say, hey, I do like this. The truth is, though, that that's not going to be the case, you know, for every album you see on that list. There are whole genres of music I don't care that much for, and I will listen to anything, you know, even a couple of times. If I don't like, you know, this by that artist, I might like that, you know, by the same artist. But after I've heard an artist, you know, a number of times, and I'm still not sold on that artist, you know, that's all right. You know, I'll pass. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, I mean, for instance, there's something called the Rolling Stones 500 greatest albums of all time, and you know, and I have looked at this over and over and over again, and I consult it occasionally, but there's no way you can tell me that there should be, you know, 4 albums by Kanye West on the list of the 500 greatest albums of all time. There's no way you can tell me that Sonic Youth should have 3 albums on that list. And yet, other artists, even artists that aren't in vogue, but I mean, I'm sorry, you're going to tell me that Andy Williams' greatest hits isn't in there somewhere, and yet, Tom Waits has 4 albums in there? So I guess what I'm saying is it is all, it's all relative. What matters isn't what somebody else's, priorities are. I honestly believe that a lot of albums make these lists because they're on other people's lists. And, you got to be cool. You've got to have, 3 Joni Mitchell albums on your top 200 because that's what everybody else does. I'm sorry, but there's a lot of female vocalists that I prefer over Joni Mitchell. I think there's one album of hers that I think is absolutely, well worth spending time with, and it's on my list. I don't have it, but it's an album that I, eventually would like to possess, and that's her album Blue. But what really matters is, what do you enjoy listening to? And so I have, over the course of the past, 9 or 10 months, started building up my collection again, but doing it painstakingly, slowly. If I'm lucky, I buy maybe 2 albums a month, and I look for bargains. I look for deals. The problem has been that in recent years, album collecting and album buying has become much more popular. In fact, last couple of years now, vinyl is outselling CDs, and I think particularly during this this whole COVID thing, with so many people being homebound and having to find, like I say, hobbies and home-based things to do and interests, because there are so few, options outside of that to stay safe. Then I think album collection is, and an audiophile pursuits have become maybe more popular again, and I see it because I see the prices going way up on some of the things that I not that long ago could get a pretty good deal on. You can still find good deals, and sometimes the thing that drives prices up, first of all, is if you look on eBay, for instance, and you have an album, let's say that you want to get, something that was fairly popular, that you would like to own. And a good example of that might be something like a Beatles album. The more valuable Beatles albums are going to be the ones that are in the most pristine condition, both the album cover and the vinyl, and also those that are like an original issue date rather than maybe a reissue. The whole thing about how there has been this renewed interest in record collecting and buying is that a lot of the classic albums, a lot of the most popular albums, are now being reissued through a number of different companies that have gotten agreements with the original, recording companies. So if you want, I just purchased this month, one of my purchases was a copy of Dark Side of the Moon. by Pink Floyd, which interestingly was an album I don't think I ever owned before. I own and continue to own Pink Floyd's "Wish You Were Here." I never sold that album, and I think I had the Final Cut. I never had The Wall, not on an LP. Now, over the course of this past year, I bought Momentary Lapse of Reason, which is an earlier work by them, and I'm hoping to get, a couple of others as time goes on. But I just bought Dark Side of the Moon, and I bought it through a company called Tower Records. I think I paid, I can't remember now, $23 for it. Because the truth is, if I were to try to go back and buy a used vintage copy of it, I would have paid many times that amount. And it probably wouldn't have been in as good a condition, obviously, as a new pressing. So what I'm really concerned about is a cover that I can hold in my hands that looks fairly good, if I put it on display or whatever. But mainly, I want to be able to feel it. I want to be able to read, the album cover. I want to be able to read the liner notes. But does it have to be in pristine condition? No. The album does. The album, I don't want scratches on my albums. It kind of defeats the whole purpose. So I can live with, a less than perfect album cover. I can live with the fact that maybe the album doesn't come with all the maybe bonuses that it originally came with. Some albums, for instance, would come with a poster or a little booklet or, Magical Mystery Tour from the Beatles, which I still have my original copy of, is in pretty poor shape, to be honest with you. But it still has that, I don't know what it is, like a 30 or 40 page, and these are huge pages, all in color, photographs and stuff of the band from the movie. At any rate, I'm going off in tangents here, as you can tell. So this month I purchased, I think, 2 albums, and I may have made the biggest bargain of all with an album that I was really on my list. It's an album called, it's one of the most iconic albums, I think, of all time. It's a band by the name of Velvet Underground. And this one is called Velvet Underground with Nico, who was a female singer. I think she was German. This album was largely financed, produced, if you will, by the avant-garde artist Andy Warhol. And it, in fact, features, as its cover, one of the most iconic album covers, in existence, and that's Andy Warhol's painting of a banana. At any rate, he paid for the recording sessions for the band and paid, for them to tour. This, of course, famously was Lou Reed was the driving force of that band. And that album, in the original album, can be worth thousands of dollars if it's in great condition. And if it's the original Verve, I think it's trying to think of the serial number on it. I think it's 5008. Can't remember it exactly. At any rate, you just don't find this album. There are reissued copies that you can get, for $35 or something like that. And you can find, really poor condition copies of that you can pay less for. But even then, you're probably not going to find that album in almost any condition for probably less than a couple of $100. Unless, like I say, unless it's a more recent reissue of the album. I came across an original, and I don't want to say it's near mint, but it's at least very, very good. I didn't pay any more for that than I paid for my Dark Side of the Moon album. And I thought when I was buying it that it was not an original. So I don't know if maybe I'm just not evaluating it properly, because I can't really believe that I have an original of this and paid as little as I did. At some point when it's safe to go out again, I'm going to have to take it to an actual record collector and see what it is that I actually have, because if it's worth what it could be worth, I can't justify owning it. I'd really have to sell it to because there's just so many things I could do with that kind of money. It just wouldn't be. It would be nonsensical for me to, hoard something that valuable when I have so many other needs. At any rate, like I said, there are a number of things that I'm looking at that I would like to eventually acquire. But when I get, I set aside a small amount of money each month, and I say, this is what I have to work with. And if I can find something that's on my list that I've got marked as, these are the ones I'm going to concentrate on, if and only if I can find one that, like I say, the vinyl has got to be in like near mint condition. In some cases, I will buy, like I say, a reissued, brand new version. But I look for those bargains because, I can find sometimes an album for, $8 or $10, and that includes the shipping. If you pay $4 or $5 using media mail, you can get an album shipped to you for a lot of times for like $3 or $4. So if you're really careful and you really do your homework, it used to be that the place to find real bargains were at flea markets, garage sales, even independent record stores, and there still are some. We have one here in the township just outside of town that I would dearly love to go spend time with, but there aren't anywhere near as many record stores as there used to be. But the ones that are there, that are still around, largely deal in used vintage albums, and you can find, a wealth of really good bargains on maybe things that you're interested in, if you can get there. It's not been safe to do that kind of shopping, and so I'm not about to go to any flea markets or garage sales or record stores quite yet, but I'm hoping down the road that maybe as soon as I feel it's safe to do so, it would certainly make my pursuit a little bit, hopefully, quicker and cheaper. But like I say, I have a budget of, probably, it depends on what else is going on. but I can't justify spending more than, maybe $40 a month on this as I go along, and there have been a few months where I've spent a little bit less. But I can't go more, and that's it's a shame, because there's a lot of really good stuff out there that I've just not been able to find in my price range at all. Typically, what you're going to find is if an album is really, really popular, then like a new reissued copy might be cheaper. But if it's not going to sell, in large numbers, then, it's probably going to go, for a significantly higher price. So for instance, you can spend I've seen anywhere from as low as like $18 for a brand new reissued vintage album to as much as, name your price, but typically maybe $36, $48. And these are for single albums, not double LPs. Double LPs can go for more. And like I say, so a lot of those are out of my price range just right off the bat. And I look for good deals on used things. And, there have been a few months where I didn't buy anything at all. And there was, 1 or 2 months where I got so many good bargains I bought, more than 2. But what I've noticed is that prices are a little higher on some of the things that I really want. I mean, some cases ridiculously high. There's if you want to get a good copy of like Fleetwood Mac's Rumors, for instance, you can spend well over $100. And the same is true with any number of really good albums. Try to find a Beatles album, a vintage Beatles album these days. Or, like I said, I'd throw that out there, but if you look at, again, some of the resources that I mentioned earlier, you try to find some of those, or, some of them are rare. There are some albums that are just rare because they never did sell, in huge numbers. And obviously the rarer the album, the more decent copy of it is gonna cost you. And if it's an extremely rare album, then it doesn't really matter what condition the album is in. It's going to be expensive. So for those reasons, I'm never going to get close to fulfilling anything but a fraction of my of the albums that are on my list. But in a future video, I will probably share with you, some of the albums that I have found, and maybe I'll put together a top 10 or top 20 list of albums that I'm, still seeking. But anyway, I wanted to share that with you today. I have, I've actually got notes here that I wrote down the other day. I was going to do a video, a political video, which I haven't done in a long time. And, and I try to explain from time to time that I really am paying attention. But I just don't talk about it very much, and I delve very little in into politics during a lot of the Trump administration, and doesn't mean that it wasn't really pissing me off every day of the week. Here I got some notes that I was going to talk about, this whole anti-science business with the whole Republican Party seeming to do everything they can to make our pursuit to get past this pandemic, and by continuing to social distance and use masks until enough people are vaccinated that we finally get this somewhat behind us. And Republicans seem to be doing everything in their power to making us fail at that task, including, most recently, state legislatures trying to overrule, governors and their state health boards from enacting any kind of restrictions or whatever. And it's ridiculous. I was going to talk about that, and I was going to talk about what do I got here? This whole ruse about. I spend way too much time on social media, browsing, comments, for instance, on Facebook and other things, and it's largely a waste of time, and I'm trying to wean myself off of some of that. But what I noticed in doing that is that there is this army of I don't know. Again, Republicans largely, I suspect, Trump fans who continue to try to paint, Joe Biden as someone who's, frail and suffering from dementia. And the thing is, they know it's not true, and they know that the comments that they're making is mere spreading of misinformation. For instance, he gave his first, I guess, real press conference here last week, and in doing so, he spoke for about an hour, and he had some notes that he referred to before he would begin to answer. And like I say, and so a lot of the Republican talking points, if you've watched any conservative media, and a lot of the comments on social media by their followers, were repeating this ruse, that Biden was confused and stumbling over everything he was saying. And anybody that watched that hour had to come away, frankly, greatly impressed, because it absolutely put to rest any of that nonsense. He was able to speak at length on a variety of topics. He was able to do so, in a concise and thoughtful way. And any comparison to the way that he handled taking questions and discussing topics, and the way that Donald Trump did, no one could watch the two of them in a press conference and try to say that it was Biden, who was the one that seemed to be mentally impaired. I don't know why they continue. It's obvious that the people that are trying to perpetuate this ruse are convinced that the vast majority of people that they are talking to have never actually seen for themselves, what they're describing. Because anybody who has is going to instantly recognize, these comments for what they were. But at any rate, so I was going to talk a little bit about that. What else? And I was going to mention a little bit about this whole idea, which I think is going to be a growing debate here as the year moves on, about whether the Democrats are going to legitimately pursue some kind of a filibuster reform. And I think that there are certain issues that the Democrats are never going to get movement on unless they do. And one of those issues, obviously, is voting rights. Another issue in which I think filibuster reform might be necessary would be, any kind of gun reform. And that topic would lead me probably to a pretty big discussion on certain members of Congress, certain individuals, one of whom would be Democrat Joe Manchin. So I'm going to save all of those topics for another upcoming video, but I mentioned all of that only to let you know that I am, continuing to follow these things, and I continue to have my own opinions on these things. I just, for whatever reason, I've not shared all of those opinions as, as thoughtfully, and part of the reason that I guess I haven't is because, I used to, when I would present my political thoughts on YouTube videos in the past, I usually would take the time to write them out to some extent, and simply because writing them down helps me, put some organization and some, it helps me not forget certain points that I otherwise would leave out. As a writer for a lot of my career, if you will, I learned that the longer I sat at something and worked on it, largely the better the result was. And part of it was that I found a better way to say something that I wanted to say. Another part of it was that it gave me more time to kind of examine it, and one thought leads to another, and you actually once in a while stumble upon something that you hadn't thought of at first. And so my problem always as a news reporter was that I always had tight deadlines, and and if given a little bit more time to work on a piece, I could probably do a better job with it in some way. And so the same is true with my presentations on YouTube. And I haven't had the patience, I guess, the focus that I like in order to concentrate on, presenting a political point of view like I was able to do, some years ago. And but my mind still works at it. And I still think about it. I devote a great deal of my day to keeping up with what's going on in the world. And of course, I've been watching a lot of the trial that's been televised here about with Mr. Floyd's death and Officer Chauvin on trial, and it is hard to watch. It is I watched that trial and I can't. I honestly don't know how I would have handled myself if I had been a witness to that. At any rate, listen, I thank you so much. This is the longest video maybe I have ever created. And so I want to thank you so much for staying with me here. And I promise to get back with you again real soon. You have a great day, okay?